Now, Jeffrey Epstein, the American financier, died in a New York prison cell in 2019, awaiting trial on sex trafficking charges. He died accused as a serial rapist, child molester, and human trafficker who was friends with some of the most powerful people in the world. Mick Jagger, Woody Allen, Kevin Spacey, Elon Musk, Bill Clinton. But some of the most powerful people listed in the Epstein Files are people you've probably never heard of. Arms dealers, CEOs, spies, and state leaders for whom Epstein appears to have worked as a private and unofficial diplomat. It paints a shadowy picture of a global elite making geopolitical decisions outside of due process. Many of these same elites attended Epstein's island, where unknown numbers of women and girls were coerced to have sex with powerful guests, for which there has only been one prosecution. The prosecution of a woman, Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's long-term romantic associate, now serving 20 years in prison for helping him recruit women and children to abuse. Ghislaine is the daughter of Robert Maxwell, widely believed to have worked for Israel's intelligence agency Mossad, with additional links to MI6 and the KGB. Maxwell's close ties to Epstein have fueled rumors that the disgraced financier was himself embroiled in Israeli espionage. The latest files do reveal Epstein was intricately involved in regional politics. But to find out just how involved, I spoke earlier to Murtaza Hussain, an investigative journalist at Dropsite News, who has trawled through the Epstein Files to understand his undue influence on Middle Eastern politics specifically, and how it continues to play out today. So your investigation connects Jeffrey Epstein to some pretty major and pretty murky arms deals, namely the Iran-Contra affair in the 1980s, when US President Ronald Reagan and the CIA illegally sold arms to Iran during its war with Iraq, and they used Israel as an intermediary. How deep were Epstein's ties to arms dealers, and how incriminating are your discoveries?
Yeah, in many ways, the story of Epstein really begins with Iran-Contra and his deep connections with many major figures involved in that scandal, including Adnan Khashoggi, John Stanley Pottinger, and many other individuals who were very much at the core of Iran-Contra. Now, Epstein himself, he was fresh out of Wall Street around that time in the 1980s. But he had deep ties with the people in the arms trafficking world, including Douglas Leese, a British arms trafficker, also said to be involved in Iran-Contra. But one very notable detail that we uncovered in our story, included in the story, was that for people who don't know, Iran-Contra entailed the smuggling of weapons to Iran and also weapons to Nicaragua as well, too, and also drugs in the Western Hemisphere as well, using this fleet of planes from an airline called the Southern Air Transport. Now, Southern Air Transport, after Iran-Contra became public, it tried to go under the radar a bit and rebrand itself. And one of the things that happened was actually Southern Air Transport's planes were transferred to facilitate the logistics enterprise for something called Limited Brands. And Limited Brands is the major corporation that owns Victoria's Secret and Abercrombie and Fitch and so forth. And around that time, Jeffrey Epstein became the power of attorney over the entire Limited Brands fortune. He got that from an individual named Les Wexner, who was the founder of the company. And then when the planes were discovered from Southern Air Transport, they were actually given to Limited Brands and moved to Ohio to service its retail empire. So these Iran-Contra planes, Jeffrey Epstein was actually the person who arranged for them to be moved there. And he switched the planes from smuggling drugs, smuggling weapons, to smuggling, to transporting clothing for these brands like Victoria's Secret and Abercrombie and Fitch. So I know it's kind of a complicated little web there, but effectively the Iran-Contra planes, the person who took charge of them was Jeffrey Epstein himself. And that history has never really been reported or noted in any of the broader story of how he became rich and how he became embedded in this world of intelligence operations. But really, it does go back to the 1980s and this maelstrom of Iran-Contra, when all this illicit activity is taking place and a lot of money is being made through the smuggling.
Something you also paint there with that very sort of complicated network is how Epstein manages to bring together sort of arms dealers and multinational CEOs in ways that aren't generally understood by the public. You mentioned Les Wexner, right? He runs the Wexner Foundation. He owns the Wexner Foundation. This is one of the largest contributors to pro-Israel causes in the US. It's a philanthropic body funded by this billionaire fashion tycoon who, as you say, his empire once included the sort of Victoria's Secret branches of the world. What have your files revealed about Epstein's involvement in this group and in the wider lobbying within US that pro-Israel bodies have managed to achieve?
So Epstein was someone very adept at using nonprofit entities to obtain political benefit, perhaps to also entail covert activities and so forth, whose funding and operations was often concealed through these opaque financial mechanisms, and also the nonprofit organizations which helped arrange diplomacy in some of the stories that we've written about. But his tie to the Wexner Foundation is very interesting because the Wexner empire included limited brands, but also included these philanthropic entities with huge budgets and so forth. And the Wexner Foundation is one of these. It's a major funder of pro-Israel activities in the United States. It funds or funded fellowships for Israeli public officials to study at places like Harvard and so forth in the United States to kind of embed these networks very closely. They footed the bill for all that. And after Epstein's, criminal activities came to light and he passed away in jail, they effectively tried to distance themselves from him in public. But what our reporting shows, based on his own emails, is Epstein was really like the shot caller inside this foundation. He was in many ways treated as the last person with the highest say over the disbursement of funds, over funding opportunities, and so forth. So it really wasn't Wexner himself, despite the foundation bearing his name. It was really Epstein who actually was in charge of this. So I would think that would make Epstein, you could say he was the most powerful person, one of the most powerful pro-Israel lobbying organizations, or not lobbying, pro-Israel activist organization in some ways in the United States. He was the one person with the authority over the purse strings of this very powerful institution. And again, it was through his being assigned this fortune by Les Wexner in the 1990s. He was basically given power of attorney of this massive empire. And one can imagine what if, Epstein was not anyone of any public note at that time. Can someone imagine Elon Musk giving power of attorney over their entire fortune, or Bill Gates giving power of attorney over their entire fortune to some relatively obscure figure in their personal network at some time? It was kind of on that level almost. It was a bit of a bizarre thing.
Another episode you uncover that sort of paints this picture of Epstein as a key figure in Israeli diplomacy inside the US. It was his involvement in a coordinated smear campaign against the political scientists John Mearsheimer and Stephen Walt, who published a paper in 2006 about Israeli lobbyists shaping US foreign policy. Quickly just tell us what this paper found and how Epstein got involved in the response.
So this paper was the basis of a very famous book in the early 2000s called The Israel Lobby in U.S. Foreign Policy, written by John Mearsheimer and Stephen Walt. And the paper was like the introduction to that book, basically, or the thesis of the book was that paper. And it was published at Harvard, and there was tremendous controversy over its publication because it was critical of the U.S.-Israel relationship. And one thing that was not known was that one of the people who helped engineer the controversy, or helped ban it in some way, you could say, was Jeffrey Epstein. Now, Jeffrey Epstein at the time was a very powerful, influential figure at Harvard. He had an office at Harvard, and he reviewed early drafts of basically a takedown of this paper written by Alan Dershowitz, who was also his attorney, which basically characterized it anti-Semitic, which made very strong personal accusations about Walt and Mearsheimer. He was ideologically invested in attacking critics of Israel and, helping people like Dershowitz undermine the personal reputations of individuals who at that time would dare to be critical of Israel in a public forum.
Now, long before the latest release of the Epstein Files, there was speculation about Epstein's links to Israeli intelligence. This was due in large part to his ties to Robert Maxwell, the father of his girlfriend Ghislaine Maxwell, and a widely alleged Mossad agent or asset. But now there's a very clear picture emerging of Epstein's close ties to the former Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Barak. The total Epstein library includes over 4,000 mentions of Barak, and in one audio recording, Epstein advises him on working with Palantir. Palantir is the American tech company working with ICE and run by Trump donor Peter Thiel. Murtaza, talk us through Epstein's role in helping Israel or Barak develop these surveillance military state models, such as that used in the Gaza genocide.
So, Barak's ties with Epstein were something that was known at a high level, but the granular details actually come to us first. It came to DropSite through a leaked archive of Barak's emails in the early 2010s, showing thousands of messages between him and Epstein. These messages show that they weren't just like friends. They had a very close personal relationship, which extended to political intelligence, diplomatic activities that Epstein actually was the one helping Barak with all this. And really, it's one of the very interesting things about this whole saga is that, at this time, Barak was defense minister of Israel. For part of the time, he was a former prime minister. You could say at that time he was really one of the most influential people in the Israeli political and security establishments. But he really looked up to Epstein. The power dynamic was really in Epstein's favor in their communications. And Barak was trying to get Epstein's help to help him arrange back channel diplomacy between Israel and some African countries, in Russia, over the Syria conflict as well. He was really looking at Epstein as a more powerful figure in this case. So, when what Barack was doing in 2013, he left public life formally, although he continued to work on behalf of Israel in his capacity as influential private citizen tied to the intelligence establishment. But when he left the defense ministry, he really wanted Epstein's help to do two things: to help him make money as a private citizen, but also to help spread this growing boom in Israeli surveillance technology and help pitch it to foreign countries to embed it in their infrastructure. And it's kind of funny because, Epstein, his home was being used as de facto like an embassy to organize high-level diplomacy between heads of state and foreign government officials a lot of the time. And really makes you wonder, how did this one individual who was really just a private citizen, on paper at least, become so powerful? But really, he was very integral to making Barak very wealthy, making the Israeli surveillance sector so well funded, and also spreading his growth around the world, while also relaying the groundwork for formal security arrangements that Israel signed with governments in Cote d'Ivoire, Mongolia, and other places we're going to write about in the future.
And his work with the Israeli government seems to have gone much further than that. Tell us, what have you uncovered about Epstein's unofficial diplomacy between Israel and the UAE before the two countries officially signed the Abraham Accords in 2020?
Well, in the early 2000s, it's very going far back now, 2006, the UAE got in a lot of trouble because it tried to expand its Dubai Ports World empire to the United States. At the time, it was the Iraq War was going on. There was a lot of suspicion, hostility towards a Middle Eastern country, any country, owning American critical infrastructure. And they had to back down the deal and so forth. So it's kind of a very it just shook up Emirati elites, basically, that whole episode. So one of the individuals that seems from this correspondence to have turned to, the head of Dubai Ports World turned to, was Jeffrey Epstein. And he built a very close personal relationship with Epstein over the course of, basically up to Epstein's death. He was a frequent visitor to his island. Epstein helped him get medical services for him and his family in Israel. He helped set up meetings between Barak and senior global banking officials at JP Morgan, elsewhere, with this gentleman whose name was Sultan Saleem, the head of Dubai Ports World. And one very funny thing is that Epstein, before he died, he used to brag about his relationship with Saleem. He said that he was so close with him that he basically ran Dubai Ports World's port at Berbera in the territory of Somaliland. And we never really had any evidence that was true until now. The emails actually did show you had a very close relationship, a very, overly intimate relationship in some ways. They would talk about their sexual dalliances and so forth in very vulgar details amongst one another. They were so close that this was really part of their relationship. And Sultan Salam is still a very important, influential figure in the UAE, still at the head of Dubai Ports World and so forth. And he's never really, as far as I'm aware, addressed this close relationship with Epstein. But his relationship with Epstein and Epstein's relationship with other Emirati elites was really the background to the Abraham Accords, which was signed a year after Epstein's death in prison. He had built up the trust interpersonally between all these individuals over a very long period of time. Again, as I said, in a very intimate way, that made it very easy for them to finally come out of the closet, so to speak, in 2020 when they signed the formal agreement. And now they're collaborating in many ways, including on Somaliland, which was a place that Epstein himself was very closely involved.
Murtaza, I'm interested. Dropsite has done really detailed work joining the dots and trying to pick out the most relevant inferences about, who has been up to what in negotiating the world order. And other outlets have not been so bold in coming to those conclusions. Dropsite criticizes the New York Times, for example, for refraining from joining the dots that you did on the Iran-Contra affair. How do you feel that the mainstream media has covered the Epstein Files overall?
Well, it's funny because the New York Times, and other places, they do cover Epstein per se. They talk about him almost every day in some cases. They're publishing op-eds and stories about him. But it seems like they're trying to actually avoid the political intelligence aspects of his activities, which I think, as we've shown, they're a very, very huge and integral part of understanding of who he was and what he was up to, in fact, and the significant role he played in not just American politics, but global politics. So, one defense that there could have been made before and that people did tend to raise is that, well, our stories at Dropsite are based on his hacked email archives from Barack and Epstein. And, they said, well, we did a lot to verify them, but they said, well, we can't verify them for that reason, or who knows the veracity, or, we don't want to ethically engage with hacked material. Like these kind of like attempts to justify not engaging with it, that excuse, as in my view, is very weak as it was. That's been totally obliterated now because the emails that we've written about, many of them have been released by the government now in their archives. They're double confirmed by multiple Epstein file releases by the DOJ and the U.S. Department of Justice, and also the House Oversight Committee in the U.S. So there's no doubt at all the emails are real now. So if you're still not covering it, then you're deliberately ignoring something you know is real. And I think that's kind of the question. Now, I do think there are strong political reasons for them not to do it. They don't like the story. They don't feel comfortable covering Israel's activities in the United States, intelligence activities, and so forth. Generally, they're just trying to pretend it's not happening because the view that they have is that if we start acknowledging it, then it becomes real. And if everyone else is talking about, but we're not, then we haven't entered into the historical record. But I think that conceit will be harder and harder to maintain because the story is resonating with a lot of people because it's very well reported. It's true. And it's touching on something everyone knows is real, which is Epstein was a very important intelligence figure tied to Israel, tied to America, tied to other countries. And the story they're telling in the public that he was just a very rich guy who was a sexual abuser, which is part of the story, is not the whole story. It's actually leaving out perhaps the most important aspect of understanding who it is. And just to cap that off, there's a term of art used in the intelligence world called a limited hangout. A limited hangout is when something is true and it's really bad, and the public's learning about it, but you need to satiate their desire to know about it. So you talk about only a certain aspect of it, but you talk about that aspect a lot. And then you leave out the other aspects you want to hide and hope that people are satisfied that they've heard the whole story because of what you have talked about. And hopefully the rest of the story has just died, be forgotten, or only bring it up decades later when it doesn't matter anymore. That's what they're trying to do, in my view. There's an attempt to do a limited hangout with Epstein and focusing only on one part of the story and leaving out the rest.
Your investigations, it paints a pretty sinister picture of the way that power is brokered in this world. But do any of these allegations criminally implicate those named in your reporting? Or maybe my final question is that the point?
Well, there are certain things like the violation of domestic arms control exports and intelligence exports that really are potential violations of laws or regulations in countries where people who knew Epstein were operating. So you're really talking about the laws of Epstein dealt with people in, all over Africa and Israel, in the Middle East and so forth. They could have been violating Israeli laws or African laws. I think that there's evidence to think that they were concerned about that in the communications. But I think that more than that, though, it is a story of impunity. This was a group of people around the world, this certain strata, a small slice of a global society, the Davos set, you could say, who really seemed to believe that they were above laws and morality and all those things. Those things are just for the ordinary people, so to speak, and they behaved in a way that they didn't really even consider it to be relevant per se. And I think the sex trafficking and the sex abuse really was part and parcel of that. Because if one were at this class and started feeling that they were had so much impunity and that they were almost like, akin to gods, so to speak, then you would engage perhaps in this moral transgression, more and more extreme levels of moral transgression, legal transgression, not just in the state, money laundering and things like that, but this sex abuse and so forth. That's very much seems to be part of it. So I do think that power, when not scrutinized and when not put under public attention, it tends to act very badly. People act very badly. And that's why we tend to hope that power is embodied in democratic institutions that we all have some insight and transparency into. But when it's these other sort of institutions, which are not really institutions, but networks, opaque networks of people who are more powerful than our government, it seems, and more influential than them, or even exert control over them in these ways, inevitably they will use their opacity and their freedom from oversight. Human nature suggests to engage in this very, very bad behavior, which seemed to, in this case, plumb the worst depths of human depravity in many cases. So, yeah, I think that that's kind of the story. It's a story of impunity more than law breaking, although many laws are certainly broken.
Murtaza Hussain, thank you so much for your time here today and for your extremely thorough reporting. If anyone would like to read the full stories, they are online at Dropsite News. That was Murtaza Hussain, journalist at Dropsite News.